Hi, my name is Dave McCrae, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Meet the Candidates, where each show we bring on either a town council or school board candidate to get to know them a little bit better. Today I'm very happy to be joined by Lon Woods, who's a candidate for Merrimack Town Council. Lon, appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dave.
Well, those of you that may not have watched some of our previous shows, just to tell you what we're about, we're not going to here to talk politics with Lon. We're not here to ask for his philosophy or where he stands on the issues. We're here to learn about Lon the person, and just so when you see the names on the ballots, it's a little bit more than just a campaign sign that you're voting for. Do you understand a little where they came from, where they are, and where they plan on going? With that being said, there will be plenty of shows that will deal with the issues. There'll be newspaper articles that will deal with the issues. And you can also go to merrimackvotes.org, www.merrimackvotes.org. There they have answers to questionnaires that most of the candidates have filled out, telling you where they stand on ballot question and some of the hot issues facing the town. So with that being said, Lon, let's come right out of the gate. And I'd like to start you off with, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a little rural town in Southington, Ohio.
Oh, really?
It was 5 square miles, rural farm.
What was the population, Lon?
To be honest with you, if I knew, I don't remember, but it was minimal.
So you knew everyone?
You pretty much did. There was one school site on which was the high school and the elementary school, and the administrative officers, which while I was going through that, changed to the junior high. There were 24 students in my graduating class, and we were the largest class to have graduated at that point.
Yeah, so when you're saying small, you're not saying like people sometimes say Merrimack is a small town of 28,000. You're talking small.
It's very small.
Yeah.
Very small.
How long were you there till, Lon?
I left Merrimack, or left Southington rather, when I was 17.
Okay.
To go to college up here in Boston, or Quincy, Mass, Eastern Nazarene College. 17 years.
Do you still have any family that lives out there?
Not actually in Southington. I have 2 sisters still in Ohio.
In Ohio. Well, I'd like to touch base a little bit on what you used to do growing up during the summers to, I won't say stay out of trouble, because when you're that age, the favorite thing is to get in trouble. But what did you used to do during the summers out there in Southington, Ohio?
Well, it was a rather idyllic growing up. I grew up in a large family. There were 8 children. I was right in the middle, 3 older sisters, and then the younger ones. 2 brothers and 2 more sisters. But we lived in a cluster of about 6 houses that were, by Southington stages, close together. It was a little neighborhood.
Yep.
So there were myself and my next youngest brother. We were rather close in age, just barely 2 years apart. And there were 3 or 4 neighbor kids, boys.
Yep.
And that made a group. And it was pick-up ball. Neither softball or baseball. Whatever you had available,
Right.
and whatever bat wasn't broken was what we knocked around with. Out in my backyard, Dave, there were probably 2 square miles of farm and woods type
Yep.
areas, which we owned as long as we behaved ourselves.
Right.
Because the farmers, they knew we were in the back of their area, but they, like I say, as long as we weren't destructive. We were a very church-oriented family. The church was in Warren, Ohio, which was a city 9 miles I guess, to the west of us.
Yeah.
And that filled up a lot of time during the week. My mom and dad were very, very active, and there was another group of children with which we spent time.
Do you have any swimming holes or any swimming out there?
Next door to us was what was called the Valley Lake Resort. Now, the irony of that is, it was a lake because that's what they called it. It was a pond, which a fellow by the name of Cale, who was the original owner from the time I can remember, dammed up a little stream, and so there was this lake. You couldn't see the bottom. Diving off the raft was an exercise in hoping you didn't hit someone, because it literally, from me to you, was about the range of your vision with your eyes open.
Really?
Well, yeah, because of the soil out there's clay, and it was roiled all the time. So we had that, and that was immediately next door to us. And as long as we kept ourselves in good graces with Mr. Cale, and later a Walt Drum, who I may talk about, I could talk about Walt Drum forever, allowed us use of the place. And at one point, as a matter of fact, Walt Drum hired me to look after our concession stand and kind of just be general.
Can we touch base on who Walt Drum is then? Obviously he played a role in your life.
Walt Drum called himself a grease monkey. He owned and operated a GMC truck franchise in Warren for a number of years. I didn't meet him until he moved there next door to us, and I think I was probably about 9 years old.
Oh, in Southington, so he was your next door neighbor.
Yeah. And our introduction as a family, and probably the neighborhood and most of the world, to Walt Drum was Mr. Cale, before he sold the property, had left some huge elm tree stumps just pushed over, and they were great havens for kids to play in, and also any animal that burrowed in the mud. But Walt, shortly after he bought the property, and having said no one to know anyone, and I guess we had probably met him just by waving or, hey, I'm the neighbor.
Yeah.
But one Saturday morning, there were these rather huge explosions where Walt had decided he was going to disintegrate the stumps so he could, use the property in a different fashion. Beyond just being very startled.
Yeah, yeah. I love hearing these stories because it's so different then than now.
Well, my
father was... Did he dynamite the stumps?
He dynamited. And he didn't know, I would say, at least from my perspective back then, he didn't know a lot about how much charge. He dynamited the stumps. One. My dad had some bird dogs, field trial dogs. They were well trained. We used to do the trials behind them with live, live shells. Sure. Pheasant dogs and quail. And he had 2 or 3 young ones in the kennel who hadn't been trained to that kind of noise. Yep. He started these dogs with cap guns, or actually clapping your hands, and then cap guns, and up to the shotguns.
Yeah, so dynamite's kind of.
So you can well imagine, and it turned out okay in terms of my father and Walt. Became pretty good.
But
friends.
It was one of their first introduction.
But it was not,
your father
it was not the way to
over?
introduce yourself to your neighbors. I'll say it that way. But Drum himself, Walt himself, became quite a mentor to a young kid who was just curious about everything. Walter was very much a people-oriented person. He bought the property specifically because Cale had at least introduced it to the community, and it had a certain following. Walt had been running a dance hall after his GMC truck duties were over. And shifted those kinds of wanting to be a people person skills and so on out there. But beyond that, he was a doer, a thinker. Every piece of amusement equipment that he had at this little Valley Lake resort for kids to ride. He had whirligigs. He called it a merry-go-round. He had horses that tipped forward and so on. But
now, did people stay at this resort?
Later on, he rented out maybe 10 campsites for trailers.
Right,
it was not a resort in that. That's what I
Sure.
mean by it.
No, I understood, but at first I didn't even understand that people actually stayed there.
Oh yeah,
I
they
thought
came
it
in.
was
I think the gate price was 25 cents a piece. Maybe,
and it was right next door to you guys.
yeah, maybe it was $1 a car if you had 6 people in the car.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. But as I say later on, I had gone by the time the campsites got to be a thing.
Well, now on, I'd like to talk a little bit about the values that your parents helped instill in you that made you the man you are today.
Well, as I mentioned, grew up in a very, I'll call it what it was. It was a very fundamental church family in the Midwest of this country. Those values were inculcated from an early age until I left home. I wasn't recalcitrant to them. They stuck. As I said, a large family and work ethics and getting things done. We tended an acre of garden, which my mother canned the produce from every year. There was probably another quarter acre or more of lawn to mow and take care of and all of that. So those values, yeah.
And what did your father do for a living?
He worked what they called small steel in Warren, Ohio, Copper Weld Steel Company. Not as big as like any of the Pittsburgh steel.
Right.
It was a specialty shop. He started on the floor sweeping floors. Told me the stories about his goal was to become a crane man, which was where the larger money was.
Yeah.
And he managed to work himself up till when he retired, after 42 or 3 years, he was the senior crane man for Copper Weld Steel.
So he had a plan and he carried it through.
He carried it through, and there are stories on that, but he would not allow his sons, my brother and I, to even think about becoming involved in the mill. He thought there were better things for us to do. It was a rough life.
Yeah.
I remember 2 separate occasions where he had accidents in the mill with the crane, which resulted in him being burned. Not critically, but second-degree burn.
Sure.
That was the first accident. The second accident, he didn't actually get burned, but they had changed to a new system for what they called annealing the steel. It was called a soaking pit, where they had this pit from our feet out, and so many feet deep it was gas-fired. And the crane just ran out over the pit with a huge set of tongs, picked up these great chunks of steel and put them where they needed to be. Well, like any other factory or whatever, there were sets of procedures to be followed. One was which you got to the edge of the pit, stopped the crane, rolled the cover back, and then proceeded to do your thing. But production's production. So you followed the lid.
Yep.
If you were into making the company profitable. Well, he followed the lid one afternoon, and the flame had gone out. There was raw gas in the pit. And just the difference in the pressure and the temperature. Boom.
Oh, wow.
He came home with a face full of superficial cuts from glass that had,
Oh, man.
Yeah. So it was a rough life, but
I mean, it's what he did. It's how he provided for his family.
And we knew that. he was a hard-working man.
Yeah. I'd like to talk a little bit about school now. You talked about the small graduating class, but I wonder if you could tell us, Lon, what kind of student you were and what some of your favorite subjects were going to school.
I was a terrible student.
Really?
In terms of, there were so many more things happening, even in a small school setting at which I attended, that whatever subject at hand was not what was occupying my mind. That not to say that I didn't apply myself well enough to graduate with the class. The irony of it for me, as I reflected later on, not then because I was just in the full, was that the top 5 or 6 of the students, of course, did very well and went to this and that college, and I was always their buddy, but I was not in that rank as
Right.
in terms of academics. But everything else was fun.
Activities in school. Did you play any sports in the band? What did you do when you weren't in class?
I didn't play sports. I played trumpet for a while, but back in that day, I was a child that had very poor teeth, and I had dentures by the time I was in junior high.
Really?
Which precluded continuing to blow the trumpet.
Yeah.
I loved the trumpet, and at one point the band instructor, Mr. Cicini, had come to my mother and wanted her to rent a French horn so that I could play. He said something about the way I could pick up on pitch and create the notes with the trumpet. The French horn, as I found out later, is a little more complicated instrument.
Yeah.
But he was confident and convinced that I would have been able to pick up. But at that point, blowing through a mouthpiece was not.
So that was your music career.
So that was the music career, and I did some drama. I did a couple of school plays back then.
Nice.
One of the big deals was the senior class and the junior class got to put on a play. So I was invited to the junior class play cast and did well with that. And we did actually that. Then the class did 2 senior plays.
Now, this isn't a fair question because I myself don't remember what I had for lunch, and as you saw, I ate it in front of you 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But do you remember any of the plays, Lon? What any of the titles were?
I remember one, and it was one that we begged the school administration, whatever, to be able to do as an extra play. I think there were other members of my class. We weren't the most industrious in terms of raising money to meet the requirement to give a class gift.
Right,
I guess that was part of the experience back then. Well, we found ourselves a little short of money. Begged the administration to put on another play.
And that was going to be your class gift fundraiser.
Well, that was going to make it so we could leave them with a gift. And it was called Her Kissing Cousin, a 3-act school play, if you've ever been involved in them. And I was the kissing cousin, which ran counter to some of my parents' beliefs.
Yeah.
But they allowed it, and we had a good time. The other 2, no, I don't remember it now.
Oh no! So I figured if you hit one out of any of them, then you'd done a lot better than I would have done. So
that was the one.
Oh. One of the tough questions that I ask, because there's so much to go to. But if you had to say your fondest memories growing up, and it could be one group of things, one particular thing, but something when you sit back and you just smile thinking of the old days, you know what it would be?
Probably. I got to spend. Listen to me. This many years later, I got to spend a week every summer from the time I was maybe 9 or 10 till 15 with my cousin, Wesley Coral. He lived over in Du Bois, PA. which is where my mom and dad grew up. And my grandma had a house and a barn out in the country away from Du Bois, about 5 miles. And Wesley and I got to spend a week with Grandma. Undivided attention. And for a kid who, was always surrounded with brothers
you had,
and
yes,
sisters
you had a big family, yeah.
Loved and cherished all of those memories. But that particular week with Wesley and Grandma, and again, as long as you behaved yourself, she wasn't too concerned, because that was even more wide open than where I grew up, in Southington.
Right.
So we had to run of the woods, we had to run of the, it was fun. Watched my grandmother kill a rattlesnake on her front porch one morning.
Really, yeah?
All of a sudden, her little dog was raising a fuss, and Wesley and I were not allowed anywhere near the door. And she took a mop handle and was beating on something, and we walked out, and a 4-foot timber rattler that had curled up in the sun in the corner of the porch.
Oh, that's my favorite. I mean, I enjoy this show so much, asking people, because just finding a part of life that we don't know today, What a great way to spend your summer. I mean, one week, one week a year, you were a VIP. You weren't one of 8 anymore.
Right. and Grandma was just, everybody's grandma.
Yeah. Okay, so you go to high school, you get through, and off you go to college.
Yes.
If you could tell me a little bit about how you picked the school and a little bit about college life.
Well, it was picked for me, in the sense that we were members of the Church of the Nazarene. They had 7 colleges in a network throughout the country, out as far as Idaho, and east as far as Quincy, Mass, and Tennessee, and so on. And they had the church had itself set up in educational zones. So Warren, Ohio was on the very, very western edge of the Eastern Educational Zone, which drew kids to Eastern Nazarene College in Quincy, Mass. So off I went.
Did you apply other places, Lon, or was that really this is where you were going?
I did not, and primarily the reason was the church subsidized the education back then. So
did any other brothers and sisters also attend?
Yes, I followed my 3 sisters, and they were good students. So you can imagine the consternation when I showed.
So obviously you stayed on campus. You're living in Quincy, Massachusetts.
I stayed on campus a couple of years, but a 17-year-old kid leaving home for the first time, supervision of the college, yes, but it was 25 cents and whatever the cost of a subway token to the biggest playland this kid had ever seen, called Boston.
Yeah.
And not the Boston Public Library. I'll leave it at that. I don't know whether I was invited to not remain on campus. I think that was probably the kindest term the dean used. I was allowed to enroll in courses, but I was not to be.
So where did you grab an apartment then?
Well, there were rooms available.
Yeah.
The first summer that occurred, I stayed with about 5 guys in a house that a minister who was associated with the college but spent his summers in a kind of an evangelist mode.
Yep.
So he left the house to us.
Oh, so he wasn't there?
No.
Ooh.
No, we were the 5. And there was certain expectation.
Were you in Quincy, Lon?
That was in a
Was it the
section
house
of Quincy called Wollaston, yes.
Oh, okay.
Right on, just a couple of blocks in from the beach.
Yeah.
Wollaston Beach.
Yeah. And did you end up, what did you end up getting your degree in out there?
I got a degree from Eastern Nazarene College in history. I managed to accomplish a minor in education when I realized there was something I should be doing.
Yeah.
I will tell you again, my student, my proclivities for good studying didn't improve greatly through college.
Well, you had this, you had some distractions.
Well, I did, and I'm not bragging about them. It's just the way that came about.
Well, kids are kids. There's not much we can do about that.
My sisters guided me along. Two of them were still in the Quincy area when I was there, and they.
And were they also enough to? Were they also happy to keep dibs on you to your parents? So.
I don't think they did.
Oh, really?
I don't think they did. I don't think they had to that degree. During that sojourn, in May of a year, I was becoming more serious about things. I recognized that I had to get at it.
Yeah.
And I had picked up a job with the print shop of the college. And it was one of the plum jobs to have because you were going to be busy and the pay was good.
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Sullivan ran that. Sully, we called him, ran the print shop. He was a French Canadian. I had the job for 2 weeks, was playing a pickup softball game with anybody and everybody that was around because school had already left out, gone.
Yeah.
And was chasing. I was playing second base and all of center field. There were that many holes in the. I was running headlong, head up, gonna do a Willie Mays catch, and I ran into a guy who had picked his glove out of the trunk of his car, saw the ball in the air, and ran headlong for the ball. The collision broke his jaws in both corners.
Really?
Busted my leg, both bones of my lower leg. So of course everybody, shake it off, Woods. We're going to be okay here. I looked over and the fellow hadn't come to yet. And as I started to move my leg, my foot didn't move right. And I said, "No, fellas, this is worse than it looks." Thank goodness it didn't come too far out of place. Down at Quincy Hospital, they set it in a cast. Now, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
Because I had made no provisions for being out of work. The college, I don't believe, had an unemployment program. Managed somehow, and I don't recall all of the details of that, but managed to get back home, which was a very hard thing to do. My father and I were not getting along at the time. Not anything that persisted, but
Yeah, sure.
Woods is a German-Irish derivative name, and stubbornness is very much part of what makes us up. He and I, or made he, me. I lasted 6 weeks at home.
Now, is this summer now, Lon?
This is May and into June.
Yeah.
I heard a story of one of the girls who went to school at ENC was leaving Warren to go back early to do a job or study or something. Said, "Nancy, pick me up." Really? I said, "Yeah, really."
Now, you're still in the cast?
I'm in a cast.
Yeah.
I've got my suitcase at the end of the driveway waiting for her to pick me up. My father comes out of the house and said, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, "I'm going back to Quincy. This isn't working out." And as fathers do, he allowed that his thoughts were that I would never amount to much, and okay. I don't really thought I'd be back in a week or what.
Yeah.
Into Quincy, sneaked into the dorm, and was talking with a former roommate of mine who had stayed there to do a job for a car dealership. President Chevrolet down in the Southern Artery in Quincy, Mass. I don't believe it's still there in that form. George Reardon owned the place. But Arthur Lomba was homesick to get back to his people in New Bedford. He didn't want to continue working. I said, "Take me down there, introduce me to these people. I'll take the job." Now, I didn't know. It was a full-time job. It was 40 hours a week. You started at 4
And doing what?
Running a switchboard.
Yeah, okay.
And you'd work till 12. It was back in the days when because of the competition for clientele, the auto dealers around Boston were trying to keep their service departments open late. Well, George was, he decided he'd jump in, so he ran his service department till midnight and needed somebody to be looking after.
Sure.
That set me on a path. I took the responsibility for that job. George took my word for it and helped Arthur out in terms of him getting back to his family. And I was still working there when I graduated from college.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just by looking at you talk, you enjoyed it.
It was good experience.
Well, now I'd like to move a little forward into how you met your wife.
My wife. Well, in 1968, I began teaching school in Nashua. I had taught 3 years out in New Ipswich. The fellow teachers in New Ipswich were all old enough to be my grandma and kind of treated me as a grandson and taught me a lot. I learned a lot about how to manage elementary kids with them, but I was anxious to move through. And Nashua,
Where were you living at the time, Lon?
I was living in Wilton.
Okay.
I had an apartment in Wilton with Freddie Nelson. Anyway, found myself teaching with this nice-looking gal. And we taught together for a couple of years, and then Nashua found itself on strike, the Nashua teachers, in 1970. It was a pretty revolutionary move. It was back when the teachers were getting organized.
Sure.
The Nashua Teachers Union took the teachers out on strike. Kathy and I weren't members of the union at the time. We were members of the NEA and the Nashua Teachers Association, but we were there in support of the union and the strike. We didn't cross the picket lines. I was president of the association, she was the secretary, and it was during that month or 2 months of that strike that we began to think there was something there that has lasted for 40-some years.
Oh, wow. Wow. So how long did the courtship last?
It's still going on.
Yeah.
Thank you. It still is. It's not uncommon to dance to a favorite ballad or whatever on Friday afternoons in the kitchen. And yeah.
Now, did you have any children, Lon?
2 daughters.
And the question I'd like to ask there is, if somebody was to come up to you today and just say, Lon, I'm a new parent, and I can use all the help I can get, but can you give me just one tip on raising children, what would it be?
Invest in them. I'm not sure I can say it all in one tip, but the time, that it goes so fast when the children are young. They better get to know you, you better get to know them, and that is just amazing to me. I mean, it's like a blink of the eye. I mean, you asked me about my daughters, Amy and Asher. You know, they both have children now, but they're still. That and what I called fences that free. And again, I think it comes from what I said earlier about my upbringing, most likely Kathy's in terms of how well it worked. There were boundaries, there were rules at the Woods house. There still are.
Yeah.
Within those boundaries, the girls were themselves. They never left the house without as they got to that age where they left the house on their own. Be careful, make good decisions. And they had been making good decisions within the boundaries with us, so.
Yeah, well, I don't want to move on without letting you be able to give a nod to your grandchildren. If you could give us their names and about
grandchildren,
them.
there are two boys. Alex, who's 6, going to be 7, lives over on West Chamberlain. with Ashley and her husband Chris. Alex is an autistic child, nonverbal, but just a joy. Works as hard at learning as anybody I've run across. And then I have my oldest daughter, Amy, has Simon. Simon is 2, or going to be 2. And he's, I think one of the phrases I can use is he's a piece of work. He's just a great kid.
Now, where does Simon and Amy
Simon and Amy and Josh Sirwa live over in Manchester on Circle Drive.
Oh, so they're all very local.
Oh, yes. Kathy and I are so very, very fortunate.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lon, we had you in Ohio, and you did your summer soul horns with your
Cousin.
grandmother.
Yeah.
And then we got you into Quincy.
Yeah.
And last we checked on you, you were in Wilton.
Yep.
How'd you get to Merrimack?
It was pretty much a real estate deal. Back then, you began to think, hey, it's time to get going. You were expected to have a house. Dana Patterson was building houses in Merrimack. A fellow by the name of Romeo Taschereau was building houses in Merrimack. There may have been others, but there was some competition in the marketplace. So we ended up buying a lot there on Arbor Street from Dana Patterson. I was looking around one fall afternoon, and nobody would tell you what was going on. I mean, you drive up in a beat-up old Chevy I had or something, and there was a cement truck delivering concrete, for footings, just one street over from where I live. And I drove in, and we're just pouring these footings, and that's all I would get out of the driver. But as I was walking away, there was a route slip on the ground. They picked it up, said Dana Patterson. I said, I know who I need to talk to.
Yeah, so you've been there a long time.
42 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, again, you're one of those guys, Lon, that almost all of you that are running for town council fall into this, is if I was going to I could spend another whole show on your involvement in the community. Gosh, when I had Tom May on here, we had to just narrow it down to committees he'd been chairman of,
Right.
and even that kept
Right.
going on.
Yeah.
But if you could touch a little bit how you've been involved in the community. It doesn't have to be just Merrimack, also, just the whole greater community.
Well, in Merrimack, I followed Tom through a few of those committees you mentioned. I know the ZBA's meeting out here this evening. I spent 2 years as an alternate on the ZBA. I was on the school board for 6 years.
Where are you? I didn't know. Mike Malzone told me that today. I said, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I spent 1 year, at least 1 year as chair, that I recall. It might have been 2, but I know one. When the kids were growing up, I was involved with the MOA coach. I was equipment manager for the girls softball league for a year. I've been involved in 2 service clubs, the Lions and the Exchange Club. Left both in good standing, but I got very busy with education. I became a principal down in Nashua. I was on the school board, and something had to give, and so that sojourn came to an end.
Now, you were involved with the MVD, too.
I've been involved with the MVD since 1993
as a commissioner?
as a commissioner, with the exception of 1 year. I got beat by a fellow in Merrimack, Tony Pellegrino, by 1 vote. He brought a bigger station wagon than I had.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
But the next year, I managed to find my way back onto the board, and I've been there ever since.
So during one part of your life, then you were on the school board and also a principal, and so I mean, your education was coming out your ears.
It certainly was, and almost to oversaturation, because I was involved with what they called the New Hampshire Principals Association, the school board. I was principal, and every time we turned around, it was education, education,
Yeah.
education. So I backed off the school board.
After 6 years, though.
After 6 years,
Yeah.
I was reelected, yes.
we've talked about your community, and we've talked a little bit about your work. Yeah.
I also
absolutely.
was a member of the Charter Commission, which I'm very,
Oh
I'm
yes, I
very
forgot
proud of
about that.
Very proud of the
Yes.
community having given me
Yeah,
that
you served
opportunity.
with a lot of the Tom Mahon.
Yeah, Tom was chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's been a chair of a lot of stuff. Very much
well
so.
deserved.
Very much. You don't appoint yourself to chair, do you?
No.
You get voted by your peers.
Absolutely.
So Tom's done well. But when you're not helping the community and that, what do you do? Hobbies? What do you do for fun?
I golf a little. I read. I do puzzles.
Sports fan at all?
Spectator. Football, NASCAR.
And could you give me now, if I asked this question a year ago, I would have known the answer. But now I don't know the answer. Could you tell me what a typical Saturday is?
Typical Saturday needs to be split up into two versions. If it's November to May, it's either Saturday or Tuesday or whatever day you choose. But grocery, trip to the transfer station, to-do lists and whatever. That's November to May. Typical Saturday, May to end of October is Kathy's father built a little place on a lake down in Derry about 60 years ago. And as he got older, Kathy and I made the offer to continue keeping it up and take over the taxes and whatever.
Yeah.
So Saturdays are the grandkids, the boats, the Loon Cup whist card game every Saturday night. We're involved in a tournament down there.
And anyone who knows this show, that's watched it so far, knows I very much try and keep regimented questions, but I don't want to lose part of you here. So I would like to touch base on you were a teacher, you were a principal, and then you had a second career, which a lot of people in town know you from there. If you could just touch a little bit about your work working for the transfer station.
Yeah, I worked out at the transfer station as scale operator / secretary for 10 plus years. The deal was, the kids were through college, and I had checked out the actuarials in terms of the New Hampshire retirement system. And 35 years, I think I was 58 or so at the time, was about the maximum benefit you were going to, be able to draw retirement from.
Yep.
So I began to get antsy and look for something to do. Kathy's admonition was, okay, Woods, that's fine, but you're young, and the income levels will not change that much. So go have fun, right? Which meant go to work.
Yeah.
Now I had.
So when you say it, you're talking about retiring from the school system,
Right?
Right. So you okay?
Right. And I had made some inroads in town. I knew Betty Spence just from behind the counter when she used to work for Bob Merrill. He was the town clerk, and Betty was the
Tax collector.
town clerk, tax collector.
Yeah.
Betty had become assistant manager, town manager with Dean Schenkel, and I used to just stop in and say hi and check on her and Dave and the kids. The day after school was over, or very shortly, I was in registering a trailer, or maybe the boats, I don't know which.
Yeah.
And I stopped in to see Betty. And I said, so what do you have for an old retired duffer like me to do? And she said, why don't you go out and run the scale at the transfer station? And I had seen the scroll earlier that winter, and then it disappeared. So I didn't know the job was available, but I applied and managed to find it myself out there, and I spent 10 good years.
You always seem to enjoy it out there.
I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, and it was always something, though, wasn't it? I mean, when I say that because I used to stop by and visit with you and try and chat, and the chatting didn't last long because there was always something going on.
Yeah, as the day unfolds.
Yeah.
There's this, there's that, there's the other. But it was a good time.
And you retired from that last year?
Yes, I did. March 31st. It's coming up on a year.
Yeah. All right. Well, that kind of takes care of our first segment of the program, which is kind of trying to get to know you. And next is what we call the lightning round, which is trying to just kind of get to know you a little culturally and what makes you tick and what turns you on, for lack of a better word. And your taste.
Easy.
Your taste.
Okay.
It's called the lightning round.
Okay.
Short questions, short answers.
All right.
If we find something we touch base on, we might spend a little more time. First car.
50 Buick Roadmaster.
Oh, really?
No, really. I bought it from a fellow by the name of Larry Kasler, who was graduating from ENC, and it wasn't going to make it back down to New Jersey or wherever he came from. He came from, the New Jersey area. So he was looking to, it was good enough, and you could get it inspected in Mass. I think I paid him $40 for it.
How long did you keep that car?
I kept that a couple or 3 years, and then left it on the used car lot of President Chevrolet where I was working, and drove out a 53 Buick Special.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I used to love the Roadmaster.
Oh,
Do they make that anymore?
I don't know how long it's been since I've actually seen Roadmaster.
Yeah, I was
on
going
a
to say, because the
Buick.
last I saw was like a 99 or so.
It was a Dynaflow transmission, and it took about 4 miles for it to get wound up to, say, 50 or 55. But after that, it was so big and such a chunk of steel that its own momentum just kept it going, and it was relatively economical.
Present car vehicle.
2005 Durango, I think.
So you still got the red vehicle that you used to have at transfer station. Favorite TV show growing up?
Well, now, we didn't have TV in the house when I was growing up. My mother would not allow it. They weren't all of that common out there until the mid-50s. So I listened to radio.
Okay.
Sky King, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. I think there was another program called The Shadow.
Oh, that's
great.
the one I used to hear a lot about, The Shadow.
The Shadow.
Yeah.
You could make up your own images.
Yeah.
I was so disappointed the first time I saw Sergeant Preston of the Yukon.
Oh, really? Favorite TV show now?
The Desperate Housewives.
Oh, really? Huh?
I love the antics. I just love the antics.
Now, I think that's winding up this year, right?
Yeah,
Have they had the
that's
final?
That's what they say. I guess it's coming up.
A favorite movie you ever saw? So, favorite movie of all time?
My favorite movie, The Train. Burt Lancaster, Paul Scofield. It was just an epic. It was a little shot of the French resistance. The Germans were trying to steal a train full of art, and Burt Lancaster was trying to save it for the French.
Oh, wow.
Mid 60s, black and white.
Yeah. But you can't go wrong with Burt Lancaster.
Burt Lancaster and Paul Scofield.
Yeah.
Two very good. But yeah, it's remained. In fact, I caught it, I want to say maybe a month and a half ago, on Ted Turner's classic channel.
Yeah, the movies,
And I was ecstatic.
Last movie you saw at the theater?
Star Wars: The Avenger. My daughters insisted on my going to see it with them. Amy grew up with me in Star Wars, or I grew up with Amy in Star Wars. And when that came out 5 or 6 years ago,
Yeah.
hey, Dad, you're going up to Cinemax.
First job you ever had? Was that at the print shop?
First job I ever had was heaving bales of hay onto the wagons out of the fields in Southington.
Oh, how old were you then?
Old enough to be able to pick up a 40-pound bale and, waist high onto a trailer.
Oh, wow.
That was not uncommon for the kids in and around Southington or that whole county.
And current job, we know you retired from the transfer station, but with you, you never know. Do you have your hands in something else? And if I walk into a local store, am I going to see you behind the counter?
Not at the time. Not at the time, but I suspect I will.
Favorite musical artist growing up?
Well, there were several of them, and it was out of a house in Wheeling, West Virginia, called the Wheeling Jamboree. Probably Ferlin Husky.
Yeah.
A fellow by the name of Toby Stroud, who my cousin played fiddle for, which
Oh, really?
is probably why his name, but Ferlin Husky.
And how about now? Do you have any favorite musical artists?
Jimmy Buffett and the Coral Reefer Band.
Oh, that was a quick answer. You didn't have to think too much on that.
Well, that's Kathy and I we're not official members of the Parrot Head Club, but those who know us well know that that's what we do.
Have you ever been to one of his concerts?
We made, I think it was 8 or 9 straight concerts.
Oh, really?
Down at Mansfield.
Yeah.
We were there in Fenway Park the fall that he came in.
Oh, yeah? In fact, that was
And,
going to be my next question. I
yeah.
don't want to be the one to tell you, but I think that qualifies you as a Parrot Head.
We were there when Jimmy Buffett exercised the Babe Ruth curse from Fenway Park.
Really, yeah?
I mean, he made a point of hitting some,
Was that the year they won it?
surf balls.
Was it 2000?
2004.
Geez, I didn't know that.
So he takes credit for that.
Favorite athlete growing up?
Y.A. Tittle.
And the favorite athlete today?
Wes Welker.
Really? Oh, he's a good player. Tough.
On the distaff side, Pat Summitt. Tennessee Vol
Oh,
ladies.
yeah. She's great.
Gritty, tough.
Yeah, she's great. And
So-
even what she's going through this year, anyone
Yeah,
that's been
yeah.
watching her, she's just tremendous. She talk about role model. That woman's
Yeah,
a role model for all of us.
Yes.
Favorite book?
The Tomorrow File. Lawrence Saunders.
What's that about?
Well, Lawrence Saunders wrote spy thrillers for a number of years, and I don't know what caught his mind or why the shift, but this one book, it's a futuristic book in terms of he looked at cloning.
Yeah.
It's total fiction. I mean, it's a story.
When was it written, Lon?
I want to say the late 80s, but it's a very interesting book.
And the last book you read?
The last book I finished was, what's the name of it? The Hunger Games.
Oh, really? That's the one that
Susan
making
Collins.
the big news about now at the,
Well,
at
again,
the theater.
My girls know my propensity for reading, one, and two, getting into maybe that kind of genre. You got to read this book, Dad. I said, okay, and all of a sudden it shows up on the table, and I read it. And it is every bit the story that people talk about.
Do you think you'll have any interest in seeing the movie?
Probably not. I probably played the movie in my head.
Yeah. I had a feeling that was going to be your answer. Well, talked about the past, talked about your tastes, and now let's talk a little bit about the future. And I'd like to start off with some of the goals you have left for yourself, including any items you might have on a bucket list if one exists in the Woods household.
Well, the goals are to continue to remain active, and most likely will be in the community service vein. Bucket list items: hot air balloon ride.
Ever done one?
No. I've talked to them from not much higher than the ceiling over at the lake in the morning.
Yeah.
They'll come floating over and let the balloon come down and chat a
Remember,
minute.
they used to have the big one in Milford.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll ever think that I would play there, but I wouldn't mind walking some of the holes at Pebble Beach out in California.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm pretty content with.
And how about travel? Do you have any places in this country or overseas that you'd like to hit before you go?
Before I go, Kathy and I, when we were married, we spent 35 days traveling the country. We had a station wagon, a tent, 7x7, and a food box, and an air mattress for Catherine. We went out the northern tier. We were going to visit someone in Wisconsin. He was going to school there summers, and we wanted to check in with him at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And then on out to Yellowstone, on out to Glacier National Park, down the coast as far as San Francisco, into Yosemite, and therein lies a tale if we still have time.
Oh, sure.
2 kids, married, knew each other, but spend 35 days in a 7x7 tent with your spouse as neophyte campers. You get to know each other real well. We had a great time. Nearly got blown away with, it wasn't a full-blown tornado in Wisconsin, but it was certainly a twister when we got back to the tent. It was dark from having visited this our fellow in Madison. The next morning we woke up, and the branches of a rather large tree were pushing one wall of the tent in. And we didn't know that had happened, but that was. We got to Yosemite, and the deal was for the 35 days, we spent the week out into whatever campground you could roll into. But weekends, we always made it a point to clean up in the motel and, make like a real couple. And we got into Yosemite. It wasn't a weekend evening, but we'd been eating chunky soup and whatever out of a can, and Kathy decided there was a really nice visitor's store in Yosemite. She bought some steaks, so we grilled the steaks up. Unbeknownst to me, signs, lock your food in your car.
Did you run in with a bear?
Be cautious with bears, be careful, do this, do that. Okay, and all the way out across there, until we got to Yellowstone, she's bugging me. I want to feed bears, and I keep telling her, Kathy, I don't know much about this, but I think when the bag of cookies is gone, it's hard to convince the bear that it's gone. Yeah. So we didn't do that. But she had this itch. We finished supper. Unbeknownst to me, she takes bones, T-bones, whatever they were, and puts them in the trash barrel. Began a rather fun evening.
Well, I'll tell you, I'd love to hear more,
Yeah,
maybe the next thing, but I'm seeing 1 minute left.
Well, I apologize.
Oh, no, you don't have to apologize, but I'm assuming a bear showed up.
A bear showed up, and the next morning I was straight and tall in front of the Rangers from nothing that was ever my fault.
Well, final question, Lon. When it's all said and done, and you survived the bear that time, but someday
Kathy survived the bear.
It'll be over. How would you like to be remembered?
Well, as a pretty sincere guy that had a lot of fun being sincere, if that's not too convoluted.
No, I think anyone that knows you would say that's probably the way we'd expect an answer. Succinct and to the point. Lon, it's been a pleasure.
David, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and good luck. April 10th, Lon Woods will be on the ballot for town council. Thank you.
All right.